I see myself in the girls that we're fighting for.
Climate change is real, and we must act now.
Argument is less powerful than emotion, and negative emotion is more powerful than positive emotion.
More than anything else, when we have more feminist storytellers, things will change.
When big names talk, they talk to us.
Global business news from the boardroom or grassroots. BBC News cuts through the jargon to add colour, depth and context. With live reaction from Wall Street and Asia, studio interviews with top CEOs and the latest innovations in technology. Talking Business.
Hello, this is Talking Business, and here's what's on the programme this week. The planet's power problem. As demand for electricity grows, do we have enough to keep up with demand? From electric vehicles to AI and our growing love of gadgets, there's more than ever to charge. But how do we generate enough power and keep it clean and green? We'll discuss that with our two guests this week. The head of the International Energy Agency tells us how solar power is the cheapest option for producing electricity and also vital for governments to meet their climate change targets. And the boss of Eurelectric. It represents thousands of European power companies. He tells me how firms are funding the transition to greener energy. Plus, how to transport the world's largest wind turbines. We'll speak to the boss of the billion-dollar startup that's building the world's biggest plane to deliver turbine blades to some of the most remote and inhospitable places on Earth. Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, across the world, demand for electricity is soaring thanks to new technology, electric vehicles, cloud computing, artificial intelligence and even the growing number of gadgets that we rely on at home. It's raised concerns that there's just not enough power to go around. And so whilst the world is trying to tackle climate change, generating electricity can still be a dirty and expensive business. The world's electricity consumption has been growing steadily. In the last 3 decades, the only falls in demand have come during the global financial crisis and the COVID pandemic. Demand for electricity grew by 2.2% last year, but crucially, it's set to pick up to an average of 3.4% a year until 2026, with data centres and transport sucking up ever more power. And as the world tries to use fewer fossil fuels like coal and gas, electricity is being used even more. It now accounts for around 20% of all our energy needs. New technology is fueling demand for electricity, and a lack of power means a hit to economic growth.
Electricity is a totally unique input into economic activity. Think about the ways that it's used across different parts of daily life. It's used in the home. Modern appliances save time and free labor that can be sold into the market. Firms are using electricity for all different types of production. As the firms grow, this in turn demands more labor and creates jobs, fueling further economic activity. And then think about the public sector. So hospitals, schools, things like that are all using electricity. A modern hospital without electricity is not a modern hospital at all. This makes the population more healthy and in turn contributes further to economic growth. So this is really unique. We don't see other inputs like this that cut across all different factors of life and lead to the same kind of benefits for economic activity.
So what's being done to make sure there's enough electricity to go around? Well, energy investments are growing. Spending on new projects hit more than $3 trillion for the first time this year. 2/3 of that is going to clean energy technology and infrastructure, and the rest is going into fossil fuels. And because fossil fuels are still a part of the picture, it's proving harder to cut emissions. Google's emissions rose 13% last year as its data centre usage soared. That's despite the company's preference for green energy. And it is not alone. As the Wall Street Journal reported recently, the tech industry wants to lock up nuclear power for AI. It quotes the boss of nuclear power firm Vistra as saying customers are asking for as much power as you can make available. So where will it come from? And given the huge expense of building new power stations, can the world afford to keep investing when higher interest rates make borrowing more expensive? The International Energy Agency is perhaps the most influential in this area. Its members consume about 80% of all the world's energy. Our reporter Jonathan Josephs has been speaking to its boss.
Dr. Fatih Birol, thank you for giving us some of your time. Let's start with this. Electricity demand is expected to grow to record levels in the years ahead. Can you just explain why it is that we need so much electricity?
Electricity is the future. We use oil, gas, coal, renewables, different types of energy sources. But electricity is the future because when we look around, we use more and more electricity. Let's take the homes where we live. We have much more equipments run by electricity, ranging from our computers, our phones, and our heating equipments. Coming transportation, more and more cars are going to be electrified cars. Electric cars are growing very strongly. And in the industry sector, coal and gas they are more and more replaced by electricity. So when we look at around the world, we see that the role of oil and gas have today in the global energy mix will be gradually, in fact more than gradually, replaced by electricity in the future. So therefore the question is, which sources we are going to use to produce that electricity?
You mentioned the sources of electricity. I just wonder, to provide all this extra power, your latest investment report says that $3 trillion is being invested globally this year. A third of that is still in fossil fuels. Is that too much given the fight against climate change?
So 2-to-1 ratio in favor of clean energy is a good news at first sight, but if we want to reach our climate targets, it is still not strong enough, and the fossil energy is still too high if we want to reach our climate targets. So therefore, there is a need to accelerate the clean energy investments, especially the emerging and developing world. When I say $2 trillion, it's a good number, but 85% of this 2 trillion is taking place, those investments in the advanced economies in China. Only 15% of the investment go to emerging and developing countries where more than 2/3 of the global population lives.
Dr. Birol, are you worried about the political aspect of moving to even more renewable energy? Because if we look at the recent European Parliament elections, there was some pushback against green policies. And if we look to the US, where the presidential election is happening later this year, there is a clear dividing line when it comes to green energy policies.
In my view, clean energy transition is irreversible because they are not only driven, not even mainly driven by the policies of the governments, but the economics. Today, solar is the cheapest source of electricity generation. Leave aside the climate benefits of that. It's cheap. Electric cars are very soon going to be competitive vis-a-vis the internal combustion engine cars. If a country doesn't want to be behind the others in terms of the industry sector, they have to invest in clean energy manufacturing. Otherwise, they will be left behind and their economies will not be competitive.
You mentioned solar power. Your latest investment report says that actually the biggest share of money is going into that $500 billion. But are you worried by the fact that around 80% of solar panels are actually manufactured in China? The US has just announced new tariffs on those. Is there a concern that the manufacturing is too concentrated and that could harm their rollout around the world?
Solar is the technology that is transforming the electricity sector. Today, of all power plants built in the world, of all of them, 60% is solar. And this is not driven by climate concerns. It is mainly driven because it is cheap. 10 years ago, solar was a romantic story. However, there is one issue we need to take into consideration. Today, one single country, which is China, is manufacturing about 85% of all solar capacity. leave aside which country it is. The magic word, in my view, is diversification. So therefore, it is important that the countries, it can be European, India, I don't know, Middle East, United States, need to look at the solar and other clean energy manufacturing and provide diversification as much as possible in order to minimize several type of risk, from the natural risks, the political risks, political to economic risks.
Dr. Fatih Birol, head of the International Energy Agency, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
So what does the electricity industry itself think is the path ahead? And how do they plan to make sure we have all the power we need? Eurelectric represents around 3,500 companies in the power sector right across Europe. I caught up with its Secretary General. Kristian Ruby, Secretary General of Eurelectric, good to have you on the programme. Now, the European Commission says electricity consumption is going to grow, about 60% between now and 2030. That's a huge amount of power that we need. What are the biggest obstacles in being able to generate that and achieve those targets?
Indeed, that is a lot of power, and we're of course very excited by that outlook. We're also keenly aware that this is not the situation on the ground today. As it were, the demand for electricity in Europe is actually stagnant or even declining since the energy crisis 2 years ago. So as power companies, we need to navigate in between those very clear scenarios for more power consumption in the future, on the one hand, and a reality that makes it difficult to actually justify massive investments at this point in time.
Natural gas still one of the big three sources of Europe's electricity, isn't it? And methane emissions from that gas can actually be worse for climate change than coal. So is it really a long-term solution if the EU wants to hit those targets of net zero by 2050?
There's absolutely no doubt that in a 2050 perspective, we need to stop burning fossil fuels. We may have a tiny residual by that time still, but that needs to be offset by negative emissions where we capture CO2 in compensation for whatever is burned. The future sources of dispatchable power need to be carbon-free. That means either nuclear, storage, hydropower, or gas turbines that run on renewable gas.
One of the challenges, of course, is not just generating the electricity, it's getting to people that need it. And I think there's a report from your organisation saying half of Europe's distribution grids are going to be older than 40 years just in the next few years. That requires a massive investment just to keep those wires and pipes all working. Where is that money going to come from?
It is a very substantial amount of money. At EU level, we're talking about some 67 billion euros per year. And it goes without saying that that amount of money is more than we can find in any public cover. So it's really essential that we establish a framework for these investments that is able to attract private capital and provides a competitive return on investment so that private companies see that this is actually something for them and that they can get their money's worth by going into this business.
Is this a universal problem, or is Europe's power distribution network unique in being old and underfunded? How does it compare to the rest of the world?
I think it's fair to say that grids are a challenge everywhere when it comes to the energy transition. Essentially, what we're looking at is that we have a 20th century infrastructure that we would like to power society in the 21st century. And this is in a context of a radically changing energy mix with more renewable, decentralized sources coming in, with more load in the electricity system and more complex flows. And it just goes without saying that such a relatively mature infrastructure will need some modernization as well as part of this transition.
When we talk about spending, we know borrowing costs have soared right around the world in the last few months. And also there are huge problems around things like the availability of raw materials. I'm thinking here like copper and aluminium. How much of a hurdle are those two issues when it comes to being able to invest in our energy infrastructure?
Indeed, cost of capital have really gone up, and this is really affecting the balance sheet of companies right now, and also having a direct impact on investments. When it comes to raw materials, that's also an issue, and it's one where we really have to say, here's another area where we need to see step change in Europe if we want to have a certain strategic autonomy and at the same time radically change our energy system from one that's relying on fuels to one that's relying on raw materials. If we want to retain our strategic autonomy in this process, we also need to give permissions to the people that mine these raw materials. So that needs to speed up because we're seeing bottlenecks ahead on some of those critical materials, including copper.
When we look at things like data centers, it's so vital to economic growth, particularly things as well around AI. And how therefore would you square that circle, that need for power to fund that economic growth and to power that economic growth, yet at the same time those climate change targets that governments have signed up to? How do they make that balance work?
Well, I guess the solution really is to make sure that when we see new demand coming, that we basically supply that with clean electricity. And what we need to make sure is that when new demand emerges, that there is a viable business model and there is the necessary permissions to establish the infrastructure between the data center and the new generation facilities. That way, if we get those things, we can actually get going and power the transition with clean electricity.
Kristian, good to talk to you. Thank you. Kristian Ruby there, Secretary General at Eurelectric. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Coming up after the break, flying high. I'll speak to the man trying to build the world's biggest plane just to get more green electricity to all of us.
I used to work the whole day when I was pregnant. I wouldn't take much rest. I remember being thirsty all the time and out of breath.
Acabamos de llegar al lugar donde va a comenzar la búsqueda del migrante desaparecido.
So from where we're at right now, we can see from left to right and right to left, a heavily wooded area denotes the border between North and South Korea. There are no fences, there are no barriers, and there are no walls that separate North and South.
زنایی که فقط باید سکوت کنن، هیچ کس نباید صدایشان رو بشنوه، صدای گپشان رو بشنوه. ما تصمیم گرفتیم که در اونجا باید صدامون رو به شکل آهنگ بیرون کنیم.
Just because we've got a disability doesn't mean that we are children. We are adults and with hopes and dreams like everybody else. Without sports, none of us would be here.
Inspiring short films from the BBC.
Welcome back to Talking Business. Well, making sure there's enough electricity to meet demand is also likely to require some new innovations too. So what if I told you one man thinks that the answer is to build the world's biggest plane? It'll be about 108 metres long. That's the same length as a football pitch. But how would that help? Well, it could make it a lot easier to move giant wind turbines to the places that they're needed to generate electricity. The bigger the turbine, the more power it can provide. But how does it work? Well, I've been speaking to the man behind the Colorado-based firm Radia. Mark Lundstrom, founder and chief executive of Radia, welcome to the programme. So first of all, tell me why your business is necessary. You're launching something pretty huge here. Just explain why, given all those challenges of generating enough electricity, what you're doing is so necessary.
So what Radia is doing is we're enabling onshore turbines to be up to the size of offshore turbines. And so there's this great opportunity because the industry knows how to make very, very large turbines that are the size of the Eiffel Tower with blades that are a football field long. And the constraints here are that you simply can't move a very large blade to an onshore location. They're too wide, they're too tall, they're too long. You can't get around corners, through bridges, through tunnels. And so we're at Radia, we're designing and building an airlift solution to get around these terrestrial transportation constraints. And if you can do that, you can end up doubling the capacity of a turbine, and you can reduce significantly the cost of the onshore energy that is produced.
Well, you're making all this sound really simple. It's anything but, isn't it? It's involved a lot of work, a lot of years already. You've been quietly doing this in the background for 7 years. You've been getting funding together. So explain to me what it is you're actually doing here.
So what we're doing at Radia, we do two things. We deliver large turbines and we develop large wind projects. And so in order to deliver a large turbine, we're having manufactured what will be the largest aircraft in the world. We call it the Windrunner. The Windrunner will be able to move a 105-meter long turbine blade and to reach some of the most difficult places in the world to get it to. So the aircraft is designed to land on relatively short dirt strips within the dimensionality of 2 turbines on a wind farm. And it's a very large aircraft. It's about 12 times the size, the volume of a 747, and yet it's an aircraft that can land on dirt.
All the talk, of course, when it comes to wind energy at the moment is like offshore wind. It's plentiful. The technology allows it to be generated off the coast of countries. It avoids any of those issues about neighbours that complain about stuff in their backyard. But you really believe in onshore wind here, don't you? Why?
Sure. So onshore wind is just simpler in many ways compared to offshore, and can also end up tripling the acres in the world where wind is economically viable. Because it turns out these larger turbines operate in much lower wind speed. All one has to do is design an aircraft around the things that are already flying today in order to move these very large objects to very hard to reach places.
How do you go about designing a plane that is so big? You said it's going to be the world's biggest cargo plane. How do you even know it will fly? And I suppose you're taking on the big boys in the aviation game, aren't you? Boeing and Airbus. Why do you think you can compete?
Our team has been working on this very quietly for the last 7 years. And we've taken the aircraft through all kinds of different design iterations, all of the different computational modeling, wind tunnel testing. We're very confident this is going to fly. Furthermore, we've engineered this with some very, very powerful engines. They'll give us a lot of thrust. And when you have a lot of thrust, you can get in and out of challenging places more easily. And this is something really the smaller companies sometimes can identify big opportunities. And so this is an opportunity in the world of energy, bringing aerospace into the world of energy, which isn't something that is typically pursued by the large aircraft OEMs today. And when we can accomplish this, we can work with the aerospace industry to take percentage points of CO2 out of the world, we believe.
There is a certain irony, though, isn't there, of flying turbine planes around the world, of course, originally designed to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and you're transporting them in one of the most polluting ways possible, by air.
The Windrunner aircraft is being designed to run on sustainable aviation fuel. And when you look at the net carbon footprint of constructing a wind farm with larger turbines delivered by air, the net carbon footprint of the wind farm actually goes down rather than up, because we're able to deliver much bigger turbines that require less CO2 to manufacture them, because we have half as many turbines per gigawatt. And that means there's fewer towers, there's fewer concrete base segments.
Now, the target, of course, is to get this aircraft in production by 2027. What do you need to happen? What do you need to overcome to make that happen? And are you on track to deliver in that time frame?
To make the world's largest aircraft takes quite a number of years. And now we are in the process of bringing in the major suppliers and getting ready to transition into the manufacturing process. And so we do intend to be flying in the next few years and have a very vibrant business before the end of the decade.
Well, I'm just trying to get a sense here of what are the key challenges for you to reach that target, because it sounds astonishing to be able to build a brand new plane from scratch. What are the hurdles you've had to overcome, and how do you get over them?
So coming up, Radia will be integrating in our major manufacturing partners, and we will be raising more capital to execute on building the initial fleet. The capital sources come from a combination of government opportunities as well as private industry and investment in order to support the program launch and to support the production of the initial fleet. and then also have the key suppliers on the aerospace side ready to go to start manufacturing aircraft soon.
Mark, good to talk to you. Thank you. Mark Lundstrom there, the founder and chief executive of Radia. Thanks for being on the programme this week.
Ben, thanks so much for being here with you at the BBC.
That's all for this week. You can keep up with all the latest on the global economy on the BBC News website and app. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Hello, thanks for joining me. Let's see what's happening on the weather front across North America. And it's been very stormy in the Midwest. Look at these clouds blowing up here, moving across Chicago, for example. And in the coming days, we'll see further storms breaking out across this region of the US in the deep south. It's also going to be very hot across this part of the continent, west of the Rockies, also in Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan. A heat wave could sustain itself for some 8 to 10 days across this part of the world. Now, meanwhile, in the tropics across the Caribbean, apart from the usual showers, it's relatively quiet, but storms breaking out during the day quite widely, I think, across Mexico. Here's South America midweek, and a concentrated area of storms there, generally north of the Amazon. Otherwise, large parts of the continent there, dry conditions and lots of sunshine. Buenos Aires around 16 degrees there. Now in Europe, it's been, of course, very hot in the southeast. And again, that relentless heat continues with some areas in excess of 40 degrees Celsius. It's also going to be hotting up in the south of Iberia here in southern Spain, could be in excess of 40 degrees. And temperatures are on the rise elsewhere in western parts of Europe, where so far it's been very wet, quite stormy, and a little on the cool side. Now Africa, midweek, that West African monsoon remains active here. A flash flooding in places from these heavy falls of rain. The rain's subdued in the heart of the tropics, and then temperatures across this part of the world generally above the average for this time of the year. Very hot, of course, across the Middle East, but we will see winds picking up, particularly around the coast of Oman, I think Yemen, so Shamal also possible. Now, across the subcontinent, the monsoon will be very active over the next few days, especially around some of these western coasts, central areas of India, and also this seasonal Meiyu front across China will be producing heavy rain, not just in China, but in the Korean Peninsula and to the south of China, some very high temperatures, and in Taipei, for example, up to 37 degrees Celsius, and very stormy across Southeast Asia at the moment with frequent bouts of heavy rain. Now, weather front moving through WA, so keeping things unsettled here. Also, this low pressure spinning around in the Tasman will be nearing New Zealand, so the weather should go downhill, I think, in the North and the South Island in the coming days. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
A new UK government in a hurry to get the economy growing with fast-track development and a green investment fund. But will it work? We'll find out from the British Chambers of Commerce and the chair of London's financial hub. Join me on Talking Business this week here on BBC News.
If you can prove a place is unique, it improves the chances of it being protected. And that's what scientists have been trying to do here at Mount Mabu in northern Mozambique. They found dozens of new species, including bats, butterflies and chameleons. But will it be enough? To find out, join me, Jonah Fisher, on BBC News.
As the Israel-Gaza war continues, the BBC has correspondents on the ground reporting firsthand. We'll bring you all the latest developments on the military operations, the humanitarian situation, and diplomatic moves across the region. Join me, Lucy Williamson, for all the latest on BBC News.
I am going to lecture you on climate change.
Have you considered resigning over this? Because you're clearly embarrassed.
Of course, I have been. I have thought about this.
I want to be totally honest with you, and I am being honest with you.
At least this should be a common ground for everyone. We should defend international law.
In the spirit of your title of Hard Talk, you're completely wrong.
I'm not offended, but I want to hear why.
You're completely wrong.
Hard Talk on BBC News.